All right, I think we're live now. Hi, uh, I'm Micah. Welcome to either my channel or Emerson's, whoever's you're watching this on. Doing something of an October special, I guess you could think of it as. And we're going to
A
talk
Halloween
about
spooktacular.
exactly. That sounds way better. Um, and we'll be talking about at least Bigfoot and ghosts, and a little bit about horror movies. Maybe some more. We'll see how things go. But Emerson, thanks for joining me or letting me join you, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we're finally doing this. We've been
Yeah.
talking about it forever.
I wonder how long we have. It's been like at least over a year that we've been talking about. I mean, we've been talking about doing a video together again for probably 2 or 3 years, and then specifically a video about Bigfoot for at least a year, I think, maybe closer to two.
Well, you recommended me that Daegling book
Oh
like
yeah.
I don't know, it was like a few years ago at this point. This one right here,
Yeah,
which
I
is
have
really
my
good.
copy too.
Um, yeah, it's a good like middle of the road kind of like I mean, I guess skeptical leaning book. Um, but yeah, he's a very informed skeptic and he like takes the subject seriously. But yeah, it's a good book. Isn't he like an anthropologist at University of Florida?
He is. Yeah, actually I have a signed copy of mine because
Oh no.
he is one of my professors, or has been one of my professors here at the University of Florida. Yeah, he's a biological anthropologist that um he specializes in like paleoanthropology, so study of human evolution via the fossil record. Uh, Most of his work focuses on like mandibles and like dietary adaptations, but he's also done some work on like bipedalism and stuff. So yeah, very well informed on like biomechanics and that kind of thing. But he's the way he's put it to me, he's always been interested in monsters. So ever since he was like young, going camping with his brothers and stuff. So yeah, he's really interested in this kind of thing. And this book's from 2004 uh, that he wrote. Yeah, this book about like Bigfoot from a it's kind of a skeptical lens, but anthropological angle, taking the evidence seriously. So yeah, I guess that's how this is part of how I got back into the Bigfoot craze. I was watching a video on the Patterson-Gimlin film with my friend. I looked at the Wikipedia for the Patterson-Gimlin film, and they referenced Dagling's critique of it. And I checked his like page, and it was like, oh, he's a professor of anthropology at the University of Florida. And I was like, oh, I'm there. I should go talk to him. And so I did. The first time I went to talk to him, I hadn't slept at all the night before, so I'm glad came off well enough that he signed my book. But yeah, anyway, so that's a little bit about why I'm interested in Bigfoot. But why are you?
I guess I'm interested in Bigfoot because I think it would be really cool if there were like an undiscovered primate. I mean, I guess if I were like trying to be serious, I would say, well, if they're right, then there's like an endangered species, and like we should try to preserve it. But really, I mean, I admit freely that I want to believe. Like, I do want. I think it would be really cool if Bigfoot existed. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing that I didn't take seriously for a long time. Like, it was like I went from strong disbeliever in Bigfoot to like I guess kind of fence sitting agnostic over the past like year, partly because of Dagling's book in a like roundabout way. But um, I mean, I guess where I'm coming down now is like there's good eyewitness testimony for Bigfoot, and there's a big problem for the Bigfoot advocate, which is that there's no body, there's no specimen, there's no like complete fossil, that kind of thing. Um, so I think that's like the main thing going for it and the main thing going against it. But
Yeah.
I think there are some interesting like undercutters for the main problem, like why hasn't there been a body that we've found? And then just learning more about like the history of biology has like weakened that evidence a little bit. And I had never bothered to look into the eyewitness testimony. It's just like, yeah, there are people who like, maybe it was a bear. Like they just see some big thing or they hear something crashing around or whatever. Like but I started to actually look into the eyewitness testimony, and it doesn't really seem possible that some of these people are mistaken in that way, where it's like it was a bear.
Yeah.
So like I think I sent you one podcast. It's called The Expedition. It was an episode on Otherworld, and I find her story like pretty compelling. Like there's no chance that was like a bear, or something like that. So I
Right.
mean, when you look into the details of some of these eyewitness accounts, like some of them are reasonably credible, and I don't think they're hoaxing exactly. Even though that does exist. I mean, there are lots of people who commit hoaxes, and I don't understand the psychology of that, of like trying to
Yeah.
like going to all this trouble to like fake stuff. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I could make the case for it pretty well to like a group of neutral agnostics, and I could also make the
Yeah.
case against Bigfoot pretty well to like neutral agnostics. But okay, so let me tell you about an elusive primate, and stop me if you've heard this before. But there was a rumored primate, rumored to exist, and there was eyewitness testimony, but everyone thought these people were just kind of stupid, and it took like it lived in a dense habitat. It was elusive. It was camouflaged. It was constantly moving, and we weren't sure it existed. And of course, I'm talking about gorillas, which were not discovered
Yeah.
until the mid 19th century, and certain subspecies not until the 20th century. So, I mean, if you're just wondering, like, well, how is it even possible that there could be like a large bipedal primate or like a large primate, that just eludes human discovery? It's like, look, I don't know, but it did happen. Like, we went most of human history without really knowing about gorillas. And, like I said, the reason they were so hard to find is because they live in dense habitats. They're elusive. They're constantly moving. They're camouflaged. It's not like they want to be found. And, I mean, I just think that that could happen again. I don't think it would be the craziest thing in the world if that happened one more time. Like, where it's like, yeah, there's this elusive, endangered. By the way, I'm assuming we're thinking of Bigfoot as like, an ordinary terrestrial
Right.
undiscovered
Yeah.
species, and
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
like an alien race or demons or
Kane.
something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, if it's, I mean, there could definitely be an undiscovered species of primates that, just like we didn't discover certain subspecies of gorillas until literally the 20th century, and we didn't know about them at all until like the 1840s or 50s or something like that.
Yeah. I think
And
so.
the point is though that eyewitness testimony existed of gorillas for a long time. Like
Right.
people, but the Europeans who heard about it from Africans were just like, these are simple-minded, primitive people, they're kind of dumb. You can't take their word for it when they talk about some kind of human-like monster that, roams around the edges. And it's like, we're in exactly that situation now. And it could go either way, like I wouldn't be terribly surprised if Bigfoot didn't exist or if Bigfoot did exist, honestly. Um, but yeah, it's just like, what happened before, like 150, 200 years ago? Like that could happen one more time. That would not be, that would not defy the laws of nature or anything like that. Um, yeah, so I just think the skeptical arguments are like a little less persuasive than I did a couple years ago. Um, and the eyewitness testimony is like, slightly more credible. Not all of it, obviously. No Bigfoot advocate would say that like all the eyewitness testimony is
Yeah.
credible and like, and so on. But yeah, I mean that's roughly where I come down.
Cool. Yeah, I guess I'm in a similar. I mean, I should say that in order to preserve any potential future of an academic career, I should say that I come down, I come down skeptical, which is not like a lie. I do. I mean, I kind of take the position Dagling does in his book at the end of the day, which is skeptical conclusion. Um, but I mean, I should say something too about like why we wanted to talk about this, or at least on my end, is not just, I mean, talking about Bigfoot is cool, but maybe some of the potential like philosophical, just like cultural implications of like thinking about this kind of thing. Um, you have people that are like overtly skeptical in like a way that causes them to like discount certain kinds of evidence. And as you point out, like there are cases where that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so we don't want to do that. And regardless of if the beliefs are kind of about sort of certain kinds of cryptids are really based on shaky or loose evidence, I don't think that warrants like discounting people's like reports of religious or not religious, but reports of like eyewitness experience, also maybe religious experiences, depending on,
Mm.
what you take Bigfoot to be. But I mean, in general, I want to like sort of think about these things from a methodology that's a little bit more like charitable. Even if you come down on a skeptical conclusion and people online are sort of, like notoriously bad about doing this in certain kinds of cases, like Dagling's not, Michael Dennett, some of the people that I think Donald, uh, like Loxton and Prothero, like they're also fairly good about giving credit where it's due. But I think like thinking through the implications, especially when we talk about ghosts and things, like what should you infer from like your worldview and then these certain kinds of evidence? How should you like read those or interpret those? and do it in a way that's sort of systematic and disciplined, but also charitable to like people that are telling you about experiences. Because yeah, I've talked to people online about this too, where they're like, no, you're wrong. Like I've seen Bigfoot. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I can't, what am I supposed to say? Like you're wrong, you're lying. Like, no, I don't think that's sort of fair. Um, so how to be a skeptic without being so skeptical in your methods that you're sort of a prick about it
Hmm.
is the idea I want to get. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about the details of Bigfoot, but I am at the end of the day like a skeptic about like Bigfoot and ghosts and most cryptids, I guess, most paranormal phenomena. But I also think, I guess I should say, I don't think we have like airtight explanations for all these things either. Like we shouldn't
Hmm.
act like they're not interesting questions or problems. Like when people bring you these kinds of questions about like religious experience or ghosts, even if you're like a skeptic, naturalist, atheist, whatever, um, I don't think you should be like, you know, discounting in a certain kind of way. That's part of why
Yeah.
part of my motivation for talking about this too is like how should you it's also not even just in philosophy, but like popular science. Like this is part of why Degling wrote the book is like how do you sort of present science to people in a way that's like understandable but also charitable. And it's like with anthropology, it's not going to get you anywhere to like just treat Bigfoot believers like they're idiots. Like that's not going to
Yeah.
help them. Like that's not going to help. I mean, this is a big thing with the early like with Grover Krantz and like DeHinden, like the early Bigfoot people, like both the academics and the sort of hobbyists, is that there is this sort of tension, like perceived tension between like the academics and the believers, and that caused like the cross dialogue wasn't great, and people have like these perceptions of each other. So I think it doesn't help the cause of if you're this kind of skeptic that thinks like science is awesome and you should get everybody to like be on board with science, it's not a good way to do that, to treat people like they're idiots for having beliefs that you think are inconsistent with science, right? The better thing to do is to say, sure, we'll take you seriously. And that's why Degling's book is great. It's like, yeah, here are some observations from like primatology, population ecology, and how to apply these to Bigfoot question. And here's maybe, but like doing the sort of popular science education while you're also dealing with the issue, I think it's something that like scientists should be aware of, as well, like presenting research in a way that's not off-putting to people that maybe have some like slightly weirder beliefs. And like at the end of the day, like yeah, right, like Bigfoot's probably doesn't exist on my view, but it's not like an insane thing for someone to think, especially if they like live in the Pacific Northwest and have grown up with people telling stories about seeing it. Like that's not an insane
Hmm.
thing to think. Um, from like immediately like a priori just from some principles of like biology you can't immediately deduce the absurdity of it. uh there were big primates a few million years ago like Gigantopithecus,
Hmm.
so it's not insane. I mean, were they bipedal? We don't know, we don't have enough fossils to tell, but anyway, so that's kind of a
Yeah,
little bit of
and
why
he,
I'm
I
interested
mean,
in it.
that species could have like crossed the, Bering, like it
Yeah,
could have come, the same way that humans came. Like it could have ended up in the same spot, like in North America, like the same way that we, plausibly got here. And
yeah,
you know, it, everyone knows I love the skeptic community. Nothing but love and respect for the skeptics, but
mutual, yeah,
you
there's
know,
mutual love and respect there, yeah.
there's like, I mean, I guess on my view, there's like informed skepticism and there's uninformed skepticism. I obviously have no bone to pick with like informed skeptics who have some, who don't believe in Bigfoot, but it's just there's too much uninformed skepticism. There's too much like scoffing. Like I listened to one skeptical podcast recently where Bigfoot came up, and like literally a quarter of it was just psychoanalyzing Bigfoot believers and just like because like I said, I do want to like since I was 12, I thought it would be awesome if Bigfoot existed, but there are like non-rational psychological dispositions that could push you away from Bigfoot just as much, like like wanting to be clever, not wanting to be a sucker, like wanting to be, oh, I'm just
Yeah,
too smart to believe in that, like these people are so dumb, and I like it, the feeling of superiority you get or something. There are non-rational forces that could push you towards Bigfoot and away from Bigfoot. Like, we could sit here and psychoanalyze people on either side of it. It's just not really useful. Like, we could just talk about the evidence, I think, like the first order considerations. But yeah, like that's what we should do. I agree with you that like if you're trying to convince people that like science is great and we should approach these things scientifically. First of all, it's not contrary to science to think there's like an undiscovered species. Um
yeah.
but yeah, like going about it like like everyone who doesn't agree with you is just stupid is it's just bad PR, it's just a bad strategy. Like speaking of ghosts, there's this one story I recently heard about from Lloyd Auerbach and Jimmy Aiken. This case in California where they're like this family believed their house was haunted. There were all these weird things going on, like fire would just kind of like materialize, like these fireballs would, just seemingly spontaneously generate in different rooms and like scorch the walls. And just normal like haunted house stuff. There were a few different things. And like everyone in the family was experiencing it and they were like afraid. So they started calling around. They started calling people to try to investigate it. And they called like the skeptical society of whatever in the area. And the skeptic they talked to recommended that they go see a psychiatrist and get their head checked. And that was the
Thanks, man.
entirety of their investigation of that. And so eventually they got Lloyd Auerbach, who's like I think he's a professor at like JFK University or something like that, but he like writes about paranormal stuff all the time. He investigated it and he found naturalistic explanations for everything that was happening to them. Like not even just like, oh, I guess there it could maybe be this thing. Like he found good, plausible, naturalistic explanations for all of it. And he actually helped them like save a bunch of money too in the process. Um, I won't go into details now, but um, I don't know. Just like from the outside, it seems like some of these like paranormal researchers, some of them are actually investigating things in a way that skeptics just don't. Like,
Yeah.
generally speaking, and that kind of attitude of just like, oh, maybe you're crazy. Maybe you need to get your head checked. Like, why don't why don't you all see a psychiatrist or something? Like that doesn't help anything. It didn't help that
Right.
family at all. And they didn't like when I'm looking at like who has like this spirit of like investigation, like who's actually searching for the truth. I don't know, like it doesn't seem like it's the skeptics most of the time. Like most of the time it seems like they're just kind of scoffing and saying like, well then why isn't there like a phone video of it? Like everyone has phones. Everyone's had phones in their pockets for centuries and centuries now, so why isn't there a video of Bigfoot? It's like, dude, this stuff has not existed that long. Like give it a minute. Like maybe there will be. um but yeah, I mean I just don't think that the like traditional skeptic attitude is very helpful, even for their own cause, like they're not even living up to their own like professed values. Um, but yeah, uninformed skepticism, informed skepticism, very big difference there. And unfortunately, I think that, you know, the vast majority of the online skeptic community would fall in the uninformed skeptic camp.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to be the sense you get of it. I mean, at the very least, they're like up to the loudest. Uh, so it might be a
The most
selection.
confident, definitely
But the
the most
loudest, most
confident.
confidence. I mean, I guess it's always possible it's a selection effect or something, but um, you never know. But yeah, it certainly does like seem that way. Yeah. Um, okay, cool. Yes, I mean, I guess should we just like run th I guess we can like go through the Bigfoot evidence items we wanted to talk about. And like so now that we've done the
Yeah.
framing of like here are some of the like action I think legitimate reasons one should like care or like be interested in at least talking about this kind of thing. The rest of this now is just for people who are interested, Bigfoot heads. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know what do you want to start with? You had a couple things, and I have, I guess, a few as well, and maybe some. So yeah, what do you want to start with? You want to start with like the eyewitness stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was thinking first that I hear something from Bigfoot researchers sometimes, or, just like advocates in general online. It's like they'll say like absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and like you hear like apologists say that sometimes, like
Yeah,
religious apologists say that sometimes. I don't think that's true. Like I'd be interested to hear your view on that, but I do think absence of evidence is actually like Bigfoot used to be my go-to example for that exactly. Like if there were, some elusive like undiscovered species of very large primates, you would probably expect to find a body like
yeah,
eventually. Which, by the way, I do think you would expect to eventually
yeah.
find a body. Like, if we were having this conversation like a couple centuries from now, I'd be like, okay, you got to give it up eventually. Like, like I'm just saying, give it some time. Like, it took us a long time to find gorillas. So, I mean, it, it hasn't actually been that long, in the grand scheme, like since we discovered gorillas. But like if it just went on like this and our like evidence base remained basically like it is now for like hundreds of years, like yeah, I'd definitely be like a strong disbeliever, I think. But yeah, I do think that like, if some hypothesis leads you to expect to see something and then you don't see that thing, that is evidence against that hypothesis, you know. So I know that Bigfoot advocates like to
Yeah.
say absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but I actually don't think that's true. It does count as evidence against Bigfoot that like we
Yeah.
don't have a fossil and like we don't have a body and like we don't have certain things that would be evidence for it. You know, like you can't have it both ways where it's like X would be evidence for this, but the fact that we don't have it doesn't count at all. Like
Right.
it has to, you know, the strength doesn't have to be symmetrical, but like you can't have one without the other where it's like one supports this, but then if you don't have that, it counts as absolutely nothing against it. Um, so like one example I heard was like, you know, the absence of evidence that it's raining is definitely evidence of the absence of rain. Like if I can see out my
Yeah.
window and I'm in a house with like a tin roof and you know, you say it's raining, I'm like, well, I don't hear any rain and I don't see any rain. It's like, well, it's definitely evidence of absence, you know, that you have an absence of evidence of rain. But on the other hand, it's like, you know, if it were storming on Jupiter or something, it's like, well, you have an absence of evidence that it's storming on Jupiter. That's obviously no evidence of absence for, but you know, you wouldn't expect your evidence base to look any different, you know, like of
Yeah.
depending on what's going on Jupiter. But that's not the case with the rain example, and I don't think it's the case with Bigfoot either. So I do think like the no body problem is like it is a problem. Like it does count as like pretty good evidence against Bigfoot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I'm probably gonna take this a couple different directions. So sorry, stop me if I'm going off topic. But yeah, I mean, I agree with, I think everything you said. Like, yeah, I agree. Like, yeah, this sort of, I get the point, right? Like, it's harder to, it doesn't automatically follow from the fact that we don't have a body that Bigfoot doesn't exist. Because there could be like explanations of that, right? There could be countervailing explanations. But in general, right? Like, if a theory predicts some observation and then you observe like either not X, like it predicts X and you observe not X, or you just simply fail to observe X. I mean that does count against like the sort of strength of the theory if its predictions don't turn out. And I mean I guess right the angle here is to say that well the predictions haven't turned out yet, but that's not like conclusive to say they never will, which is like fair enough. But I mean, at the end, we'll talk about this. At the end of the day, I kind of like this is, I think, the ultimate thing. Like, there just isn't really any good evidence, any conclusively good evidence, and you would expect at least some, I think. I mean, it'd be interesting to look at the case of, I don't know the details of, I mean, thinking about the gorilla example is interesting, but there's differences of like okay like the population density of like the Pacific Northwest United States is probably greater but then also like the scientific resources allocated to like looking for mountain gorillas are probably also higher so I mean that counts um the there are a lot of and I don't know exact the time frame of like at what point were these eyewitness reports heard versus when were they like confirmed because the first like I don't know like the Rock Canyon or Ape Canyon like the first ever Bigfoot sighting I think was from like the early or the late 19th century. So I mean it's been close to 100 years of like the Bigfoot reported eyewitness sightings. You would expect like something I think at least semi-conclusive at this point. And you mentioned I think the fossil record is honestly more damning of a problem than the nobody in a way because I mean, I don't know. I go back, like Jeff Meldrum, I go back and forth on how I think about this point. So Jeff Meldrum has pointed this out too. The late Jeff Meldrum, unfortunately. For those who are not aware, he's a big like academic anthropologist, supporter of Bigfoot, like kind of the last living like premier academic supporter of Bigfoot, kind of the successor to Grover Krantz. He just recently passed away from cancer, unfortunately, and I think he was working on a second volume of his book on Bigfoot. So it's unfortunate because I was looking forward to that. But he's pointed this out too. They're like, well, it's pretty hard. Like, it's not very often like walking around the woods that people find like black bear remains either. Um, which like I take the point, but people have found them. It doesn't happen
Yeah.
it doesn't happen all the time, but people have. Like Dagling points this out in the book. He was like, I don't know what to say to this other than offer a personal example. Like I was hiking with a friend one time and we found like a fully intact like black bear scalp, like on like
Mm.
near like a riverbed or something. So he's like, so yeah, it's rare, but it happens in
Yeah.
the Bigfoot case, like I think you would expect that it's rare that it happens, even considering the fact that it's potentially an endangered species. But the fossil evidence is a problem too, because if they had crossed like the Beringia land bridge, and there was like a continuity between like the Asian Gigantopithecines, um, and like North American Bigfoot, you would expect to see that reflected in the fossil record to some extent. Like this is just general like how primatologists follow the fossil record, they would expect to see like some trace, and we just don't have anything. I mean, not that these things always preserve that well. Like even with Gigantopithecus, we have
Yeah.
like less than 10 fossils, and they're all like jaws
Yeah,
mostly.
jaws and teeth, like it's
Yeah.
not a lot to go on.
So, I mean, there are good reasons to think that the evidence would be pretty scarce, but
Yeah.
I think you would expect to see something between like eyewitness reports, like, DNA, because all the DNA like meta-analyses have been inconclusive. We talk about the footprints at some point too. Those are
Yeah.
also problematic in certain kinds of ways. I do want to say, I mean, there's one thing to the credit of the Bigfoot believers, and I've talked to Degling about this a little bit too, like primates are really good at avoiding detection. Like people that
Yeah.
work in the field with chimpanzees say that like if the chimpanzees like don't want you to see them, you won't. Like they will just like stay away until they want like are okay with being seen. Like you'll hear them kind of like screeching and like they'll move around. They'll let you know they're there, but they are like really good at avoiding detection if they want to. So like to the believer's credit, higher like intelligent primates are really good at avoiding human detection. But maybe we'll talk about this later. It's a separate point. That is true, but also people do see them, and we do have fossil records and
Yeah.
DNA remains. And if they were really that elusive, we wouldn't have all the eyewitness sightings we do, I don't think.
Right.
Or at least we
Yeah.
wouldn't have veridical eyewitness sightings. So I don't know if any of that addresses what you were saying. I mean, I agree, but I think like fundamentally this is the biggest problem. Like if Bigfoot existed, you would expect there to be one Bigfoot fossil somewhere that somebody had found
Hmm.
in like North America, or like one hair sample, one fecal sample, one like body, one verifiable sighting. I mean, like you would expect something, and there isn't anything. So I think at the end of the day, like the where I fall on the question is like because of that, like yes, absence of evidence is evidence of absence in in like okay, in like zoology, that's the case. If you're postulating the existence of a species and there's no evidence for it, that's evidence it doesn't exist. Like that counts.
Hmm.
So I think the right place to fall on this question is to say that we don't have any evidence, so we should probably take the position Bigfoot doesn't exist. But I would also not have I wouldn't it would not upset me at all. In fact, I would enjoy it, and I wouldn't be super shocked if like tomorrow there was like a specimen or something. It was like okay,
Yeah.
great. Because it's definitely not like impossible in like logically or zoologically or in any sense. Um,
Bigfoot
but
is logically possible.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like the logic of like the sort of like natural science and like in primatology and everything does not like rule it out. But
yeah.
anyway, so sorry, that was a roundabout way of answering your question by bringing up a bunch of other things. But I agree with the methodology, and I think this is an issue. But as I alluded to in there, I mean, the believers have some good reasons. Like there are good reasons from other like science studying primates to think that like you wouldn't have a like plethora of evidence.
Yeah.
It's simply not true that like because we have phone cameras, we would expect to have all these videos of Bigfoot. Because I just pointed out, people that work with chimpanzees like say this. They're like, yeah, they don't if they don't want you to see them, you won't.
Hmm.
So that doesn't follow the thing about the phones at least, or even like game cameras. People bring that up all the time, but it's like you don't have game
Yeah.
cameras everywhere, and I mean, I don't know. I think it was in Vietnam. They only very recently got game camera footage of like a type of deer or something that they
Hmm.
had
Oh
postulated for. I
yeah,
forget the name.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was very recent that they got any like video evidence of that. They'd been looking for it for, I think, decades. So it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it does, right. It's not simply open and shut, but the fact that there's no evidence is pretty telling, I think. But I don't know. Does that
Well,
answer what we're
I
talking
mean,
about?
there's no, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no forensic evidence. Like there's
Yeah.
obviously lots of like evidence in the form of eyewitness testimony, but
Right. Yeah.
yeah, there's no like forensic evidence. But even like the DNA evidence, like you said, when it's been alleged that like, oh, there's some hair sample or something, sometimes it does come back inconclusive, which to me is interesting. Like it didn't
Yeah.
come back as like it's definitely this or it's definitely that. It came back inconclusive, which, that's like better news for the Bigfoot advocate than if it was like, well, this is a bear, you know. But
Yeah.
it didn't come back like that. It came back inconclusive, at least in some cases, I think. Um, but yeah, I mean, you're definitely right that like bodies are harder to come by than people I think assume from the armchair, but like it does happen. Like I've spent collectively like weeks or possibly even months like in the woods, like hiking and camping and stuff, and I've never seen like the dead body of like a
Yeah.
bear or a mountain lion. Um, and the thing is like okay, so there's like a pretty shocking number of hikers and campers who have gone missing in like national parks and like long trails like the PCT, and they've never been found. Like
Right.
whether
Okay.
they slipped and fell or they broke a bone or they starved or they were attacked by a predator or like died in some other way. Um, it's just a fact that they've never been found, despite lots of people actively searching for them, and they know the general
Yeah.
area they were in. They know where to look. They really want to find them, and yet they still can't find the bodies of these large bipedal primates. Um, and like, that's because they get eaten. Like they get eaten by big creatures and small creatures. Like bears will literally eat your bones.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you decompose and there's eventually, sadly, there's nothing left of those missing hikers, almost certainly. Um, but yeah, yeah, the Bigfoot advocates are right that like, it's just not that common to find like a fully intact dead body of like a large
Right.
animal out in the woods. Like, if you're just sitting in front of a computer all day, you might think that that is like, very likely, but it's just not. And in the I was on this podcast called Otherworld talking about cryptids, and they interviewed a wolf researcher at the end, and I included it in the video on my channel. And she was saying how, like, they have GPS trackers on some of these wolves, and then they know the wolf is dead, it hasn't moved for days or whatever, and then they go out to find it, and like sometimes they can't find it. Like, first of all, it's very hard to find the bodies, and there have been a couple cases where they just can't find it and they give up. Like they have a literal GPS tracker on the wolf and they still can't find it. Okay, so like it is hard to find bodies in the woods. Like I think it's much harder than people
Yeah.
realize. So like they know the general area, they know where to look, they're motivated to find it. They have a GPS collar or like, some kind of tracker, on the body and they still just can't find it. So I agree that the no body problem is evidence against Bigfoot, but I think people overestimate the strength of that evidence like pretty consistently. Um, yeah, like for the reasons that we've been talking about. Um, but there are other reasons as well. And like I kind of view these as undercutting defeaters. Like the way the argument is supposedly going is like, okay, if Bigfoot existed, we would expect to find fossils or, a carcass or something. And, like you mentioned, fossilization, which I think I rate lower than you do as evidence against Bigfoot because my understanding is like it's very difficult for fossils to form. Like the conditions have to be like exactly right, with like sediment and all that. Like it's rare for fossils to form at all. Like this is why Richard Dawkins says like, oh, I would be honored to be fossilized, because it just
Yeah.
happens to so few animals. There are certainly species that have existed that we have no evidence of, in the past that went extinct. Like there are probably many, many, many species that lived like maybe even alongside humans that have died out and we don't know about them. Like we've just never found anything because none of them were fossilized. Um, so, the argument is supposed to go like, if Bigfoot existed, we would find like a dead body or a carcass or a fossil or whatever, but we don't find that thing, so, Bigfoot is not real. And like I said, I view some of these things we're talking about as like undercutters for that inference of like, if Bigfoot existed, then we'd expect to see this. It's like, well, we can kind of cast some doubt on that inference. Like there's some grounds for doubting. It's not necessarily the case that like if Bigfoot existed, we would expect to see A, B, and C. It's like, well, bodies are hard to find, like fossils are rare. Um, bodies are much harder to find than people realize. But there are some other possibilities that are like admittedly kind of speculative, but they're in line with the eyewitness testimony. Like I think it's possible that Bigfoot, in virtue of being like an intelligent primate, buries its dead, like
Yeah.
like we do, but also like elephants do, like chimpanzees do, like they cover dead bodies with like branches and things like that sometimes, return to the burial site and so on. Like, um, so I don't think it's really like, it's not like just pulled out of thin air that like, well, yeah, they could bury their dead. Like it would be kind of weird actually if like an intelligent primate just like if their friend died or their family member died and they were just like, well, see ya. Like I'm just gonna leave you at the bottom of that cliff you fell off of. So I think it's like, consistent with, Bigfoot lore that um, that they would bury their dead. So that would be, potentially another reason that we might not see a body lying around. um, because they don't leave dead bodies lying around. Um, yeah, so I thought that was like, yet another undercutting defeater in addition to the ones that we've mentioned. Again, it's not like conclusive, like, oh, Bigfoot definitely exists. It's just like, no, I'm not so sure about this inference that like if Bigfoot existed, we would like just it's necessarily the case that we would find, A, B, C, and D. It's like, no, there are like plenty of reasons why you might doubt that we would find those things. Um, nevertheless, it is evidence against Bigfoot, but I just don't want to overestimate the strength of that evidence. And of course there are like other more far-fetched possibilities that I don't take seriously about like, some people think Bigfoot is like it's like a race of aliens
Yeah.
and like that's why the tracks suddenly end sometimes. It's because they got beamed back up into their spaceship or something. Or, I'm sure there are like Hugh Ross types who believe that Bigfoot is like, it's demonic activity actually. And Hugh Ross, if people don't know, is like he thinks that UFOs and aliens are like literal demons. So I'm sure there are some people who think that about Bigfoot. Um, and also, like, you might not think of Bigfoot as like an undiscovered ordinary species. Like, this is not a thing that like Mormons believe, but it is like attached to the Mormon lore that Bigfoot is just Cain.
Yeah.
He's the biblical Cain who is like cursed to live forever on Earth, and he's just this hairy, smelly dude who like that explains why he's so hard to find and why the testimony's kind of all over the place. He's just kind of hobbling around. Um, so yeah, there are like these more far-fetched possibilities for why you wouldn't expect to find a body, but like I said,
Yeah.
if we're treating it as like an ordinary undiscovered terrestrial species, there's still some, there's some reason, some like grounds for doubting that like we would definitely find a carcass or something like that. And I think it like weakens the evidence from like the no body problem enough that I'm like, okay, yeah, I can kind of see that. And then plus when, when we talk about the more positive evidence for Bigfoot, it's like, yeah, look, like the evidence against Bigfoot is not quite as strong as I thought it was previously. And the evidence for it, I think, is like a little more credible than I had, given it credit for.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think like it's definitely not, as I said, I think the absence of evidence thing is pretty damning, but I guess I should clarify. I don't think it's like conclusively damning in the sense that you can draw,
Hmm.
like infer from that directly, like, okay, Bigfoot definitely doesn't exist. So I said I think like the reasonable position to take is that like, given that there's no like forensic or sort of um and there's no like conclusive evidence, like strong evidence in the sense that like scientists would accept, like the sort of right thing to do is to say, yeah, it probably doesn't exist, but I'm not gonna like rule out the possibility. I think like yeah, people like ruling out the possibility, and I don't think I mean Degling doesn't do that. I don't think either. He kind of leaves some in principle ways open that um it could maybe show that this is true. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean I
like
think that
the smarter skeptics are not going to act like it's like necessarily the case that if Bigfoot existed, we
right.
would definitely have a carcass. But it's just that's the way they talk sometimes. Like that's the way the skeptics seem to be, like you said, it's like they treat it like it's open and shut. And
Yeah.
the only way I can make sense of that is if they think there's this really strong connection and that there are like no possible ways of undermining this inference. And it's like, no, there's like and it's not even like what I'm saying is so far-fetched and like so crazy. It's like no, this is I think everything I just said is true. Like there's definitely some reason to doubt that we would have a body or have a
Yeah.
carcass.
Yeah, I think, I mean, as far as I probably should have brushed up in some of the details of the fossil stuff. I guess I can reference people something if they want to double check this, but I think your table, people should be able to find it online. Maybe it's in Skeptical Inquirer, but Michael Dennett and Dave Dagling and one other person, forget who, they wrote a review of Jeff Meldrum's book, Searching for Sasquatch, I think is the book. Jeff Meldrum, the academic I mentioned who wrote this book, arguing for the existence of Bigfoot. A couple of skeptics, including Dagling, wrote a review of it, and Dagling's portion of the review was just pointing out the sort of inconsistency of the hypothesis with the fossil evidence. So he probably gives some better, like in principle reasons there than I remember for thinking that you would expect it. I mean, it's also, I guess one thing to say is like it's sort of tough to talk about these kind of things in principle because there are plenty of like reasons we might expect undercutters, but we also don't know enough about Bigfoot to like say like right you can do comparative stuff of like oh well chimpanzee like what I've been doing. It's like yeah, to your point, yes, chimpanzees do this, so it's not impossible that like primates do. But like we don't have any sort of like baseline, like we don't have a sample of like what we can actually expect like a Bigfoot behavioral ecology to look like. Or and like yeah, there is exactly like there's inconclusive DNA, but like presumably they have enough primate DNA that we would at least be able to identify it as a primate if it was a semi-intact sample.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, like it's these things are all like all options in the sort of possibility space, but it's tough to it's you can't really say for sure. They're like, well, if Bigfoot existed, we would expect that they do this, and that's why we don't have this observation because we don't know what we should expect them to do because we don't like have any sort of baseline for saying that. I mean, we can say these kinds of things about like chimpanzees or humans. Um, and yeah, I mean, I guess the
We
thought,
can now, but like chimpanzees, like I was going to bring up Jane Goodall, but like there's a lot that we didn't know about chimpanzees
yeah,
that we owe to Jane Goodall just, because of her research. But like there were lots of things that people had tons of false beliefs about chimpanzees, like in academic biology, like prior to her
oh yeah,
research, which was, like 50 years ago. Um, but yeah, so even when we do have like, it's like we can observe chimpanzees, there were all kinds of like totally false things that, she disproved.
right,
But
yeah, yeah,
yeah, can I read a quote from Jane Goodall actually?
yeah.
Because she was kind of open to Bigfoot, but oh, and she just recently passed away, which
I
is
know,
really sad.
fortunate,
She was awesome. I love Jane Goodall. I love her story, like how she got into like researching primates and everything.
yeah.
Like she was so cool. But anyway, this is a quote from her in an interview. She was in rural Ecuador, and she asked her translator to ask some local hunters a question. Quote, "All I said was, ask if he's seen a monkey without a tail. I didn't say anything more than that. Four of those hunters said, oh yeah, we've seen a monkey without a tail. It's about 6 feet tall and it walks upright." And she said these people knew nothing about Bigfoot. Quote, every single country has its version. Yeti, Yowie in Australia, Wild Man in China. So I don't know if it's perhaps a myth that stems from maybe the last of the Neanderthals. But then, is the last of the Neanderthals still living in these remote forests? I don't know. But I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, and I'm not going to say people who believe in it are stupid. Um, so yeah, she was like, open to Bigfoot, and she'd been all over the world studying primates, and she's like, yeah, this might be real. Honestly, it might be like an offshoot from Neanderthals. It might be something else. It might be like myths generated by offshoots that have since died out. But yeah, I just think it's interesting that she was in, rural Ecuador where like no one knew about Bigfoot lore, and they're just like, oh yeah, we know about Bigfoot. Like this kind of thing like independently arose across cultures, which like could either be, you could view it skeptically as like, well, there's something about the psychology of humans that like consistently produces this belief across times and cultures and everything. Or you could think, yeah, they're just seeing a thing. Like that's why there are these like consistent reports. Um, yeah, it makes I mean, there are like elusive primates in many parts of the world, and it just like I said with gorillas, it just makes sense to me that we could find out that there's some especially elusive, like endangered population that we discover later.
Yeah, that seems right. Yeah, it's kind of the way they phrase that. Like, yeah, we've seen some without tails. They're like roughly 6 feet tall. I mean, you wonder like if they're just like messing with her, like because it sounds like a human as well, like a 6 foot tall monkey with no tail. Um, I mean, yeah, but yeah, that is interesting. I mean, that's cool. I mean, I think like that's a perfectly fine attitude for a primatologist to take. I think I should say, I mean, to clarify what I said, like last time, like I take your point, you're right. Like there were a ton of false beliefs about the primates before we had the evidence. My point was more about like hypothesis constraint, I guess, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
you want your hypothesis to be constrained by the data somewhat. And this is a problem not just talking about Bigfoot, but in like paleoanthropology in general, this is the thing that happens where like you have uh like a species, like recently has happened with like Homo naledi, where you have like a handful of fossils, and then you have biological anthropologists look at it and they say, oh, well, this fossil is an adaptation for this. And they come up with some story about like how the sort of way the bone is shaped could have been an adaptation to some environmental thing. It's like, well, yeah, that's possible, but there's no like reason to think that that's why it happened. I mean, so in general, in anthropology, like hypothesis constraint is important and often, I think, ill practiced. This is the lesson of Dagling's other more recent book that's just on paleoanthropology, no Bigfoot. Um, but I mean, just in general, right? Like you want your hypotheses to be constrained by the data. Like you can always come up with some sort of like a priori explanation for something, some observation or some lack of an observation in the case of Bigfoot. But without any sort of like sample or actual data to constrain the hypothesis, I mean, it counts for less, I think. I mean, this is why, I mean, like
Yeah.
that's like, yes, there are plenty of in principle reasons that we may not observe like evidence of Bigfoot, but also we don't know anything about Bigfoot as a zoological entity because we don't have any
Hmm.
samples or any actual data. So there's nothing that's really constraining our hypotheses or explanations, and that I think is a problem because like the degrees of freedom of the interpretation are very high. So, I mean, I think
Yeah.
that that counts against some of these undercutters, and I mean, it doesn't count against them directly, but it's one reason to think that like, you know, it's hard to infer like any information. But I think like to your other point, like yeah, and Degling points this out. Like if Bigfoot exists, if we're talking about any sort of plausible version of that, it's going to be a bio like an organism. And what that means is it has to exist in a population in order to reproduce, which means it has to like be able to extract enough resources. So even beyond like the body, you would expect to see some like other kinds of like ecological evidence, I think. Um,
Yeah, yeah, because
that
they must consume a lot of calories, so they got to
yeah.
be eating something.
And if we go full on with the chimpanzee comparison, then we would expect them to use tools and we'd expect to like see that kind of
Mm,
thing too. And
yeah, true.
but we don't. But again, we don't. I mean, that's we don't know. Like if they're as sophisticated as chimpanzees or less or more, because we have no idea. We don't have a Bigfoot like organism to study. So none of this is to say like I disagree, right? Like there are some plausible reasons thinking comparatively from like good like science of primates to think that it's possible we wouldn't see these things. But it's hard to say for sure that like how strong those undercutters are. I guess that's what I'm saying. Like
Hmm.
uh, without some sort of empirical like constraint on the hypothesis in place, it's hard to say for sure how much we should take those undercutters to undercut. Just isn't to say they're,
Yeah.
so I don't know. That's yeah.
No, it's a good point. Like the lack of hypothesis constraint is a big problem with like alien stuff. Like
Right.
because
Yeah.
you can just kind of say anything about the psychology of aliens or like why they're doing what they're doing. But it does cut both ways. Like it's hard like I don't think you can really be a hardcore skeptic about Bigfoot or aliens for that matter and like not implicitly make claims about the nature of the thing that you're talking about. So like I obviously I like grant the point that you're making, but I just think it goes both ways. I think it
Yeah.
does weaken the undercutters, but it also weakens the inference from like, oh, if Bigfoot existed, we would expect to see X, Y, and Z. It's like, yeah, the fact that it's so unconstrained, it I think it's a problem for everybody. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It's just you can just kind of say anything because we don't have anything to go off of except for eyewitness testimony, and like we don't know which ones we should credit, because obviously we can't credit all of them. Like partly for the reason that you're saying, where it's like, look, if we say that all these sightings are real, then we should definitely have a body. We should definitely have like a video. Because, there are like many, many, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it is like in the tens or hundreds of thousands. So it's like, if it's that common, then like
Yeah.
you would definitely expect more. So like if you do believe in Bigfoot, you have to just toss out like a huge portion of the eyewitness testimony, which you pointed out in a Substack post about this. Like that's kind of a
Yeah.
dilemma for the Bigfoot advocate is like the main thing you have going for you is the eyewitness testimony, but in order to believe in Bigfoot, you have to toss out like the majority of the eyewitness testimony. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem for the Bigfoot advocate side of things. But I think that there's still enough like credible eyewitness testimony that I take it seriously. Like I don't know how much, like I don't know, I can't give like an exact proportion of like what I take seriously and what I don't, like because I obviously haven't read all the cases. Um, but some of them are pretty compelling, and it's like, look, this was either real or they are just like lying through their teeth, which I guess we should talk about because one wrench in the gears is that, we have to be wary of hoaxers. I am not this way myself. I don't get the psychology of why people do this, but there are people who spend a lot of time and money like creating like fake stories and like doctored images and like fake footprints. I find that incredibly annoying because I want to like figure out what's real and like figure out the way the world
Yeah.
is. And then there are people just like intentionally throwing like a wrench in the gears there. But even like skeptics will acknowledge that like most of the people involved like in like researching cryptids are like genuine believers, they're like earnest in their convictions. They're not hoaxers or liars or anything, but those people do exist. Um, the thing is, I just don't think it really counts as like solid critical thinking to just, you know, when you don't know how to answer something, just be like, well, it's a hoax. They're lying. It's
Yeah.
like, well, what reason do you have for thinking that other than you don't think Bigfoot exists? Like, you just don't, like, that would get you laughed at in a room full of like smart people to say that you believe in Bigfoot. And honestly, that is the heuristic that like most people use, and especially skeptics. Um, like I, Matthew Adelstein pointed this out in a Substack about conspiracy theories, where he said like that, like in reality, that is how most people are reasoning about conspiracy theories. Like, and that includes like Bigfoot, even though it's not a conspiracy, where it's just like, what would you like? Okay, what could I say to a room full? Like, what would sound crazy to a room full of smart people? And then they just like avoid those beliefs, and like they're willing to say anything like in service of that, like to further that end. But yeah, that's just not a very good well, I mean, the thing is, it actually is a good heuristic like a lot of the time. Like what would sound really stupid to like what would get you laughed at in a group of smart people, um that actually is not a terrible heuristic, but it's a heuristic. It's like a rule of thumb. It like there are going to be some things that sound crazy to like well-educated people that turn
Yeah.
out to be true. So like you have to actually evaluate like the first order evidence. You can't just like go off of this kind of like common consent, sort of reasoning. But yeah,
Yeah.
I just think that I just hate hoaxers so much. I hate them.
Yeah, they kind of ruin it for the
But
rest
yeah.
of us that want to, I guess real quick before I we move on, I would say one thing. Like I take your point, and like to make it going back to the hypothesis constraint thing, like to make it
Hmm.
explicit, like yeah, what I said about hypothesis constraint also applies to the inference. Um,
Hmm.
if Bigfoot existed, we would expect X data. It's like, well, you don't know anything about the species, so you don't. I mean, so you can't make that inference as a blanket statement. I think there are potentially some asymmetries where some of the st forms of that statement are just like sort of bog standard things you'd expect from any like
Hmm.
zoological species. Like you'd expect remains, you'd expect a certain kind of ecological impact. So I mean, there are like fossils, like so there are some versions of that like charge that I think don't build in any sort of like unconstrained hypotheses about like Bigfoot cognition in the same way maybe the
Hmm.
undercutters do. So I think there's potentially an asymmetry, but only with some kinds of the evidence, right? And in
Yeah.
general, you can't. Yeah, I take, you're exactly right. Like the skeptic can't do the same thing and infer, like, oh, well, given what Bigfoot is like, potentially we'd expect this kind of thing. It's like, well, we don't. What do you mean? What are you talking about? We don't know that anything
Yeah.
about that. So
I
that
guess
that's
I was thinking more about because that's true. Like that, there is an asymmetry there where it's like, look, I'm not saying anything that's like unique to Bigfoot. I'm assuming Bigfoot is like an animal,
yeah,
and like there are certain things that apply to animals. So like, there's clearly an as versus saying like, well, they bury their dead, because they're. It's like, yeah, that's clearly different. Like there's an asymmetry there. But I think there is a symmetry with someone saying they definitely don't bury their
right.
dead.
Yeah, that's
Like,
that's right.
um, but but yeah, no, you're right. But I mean, that's part of why we're bringing up examples like gorillas or like the trail cam deer in I forget what region that is in,
I
but
want to say Vietnam, but
um
I don't know for sure. Yeah,
yeah, where it's like, well, look, that also applies to ordinary species. Like it is hard to find like videos of certain elusive species that
yeah,
have like a low population. Um, so yeah, I think that there's not an asymmetry like with some of it, like where you're like saying, look, just treat this like any other animal. And it's like, yeah, treat it like any other animal, like
yeah.
gorillas. So like I don't think the skeptic comes out totally ahead. It's just when you start veering off into like the more speculative undercutters I mentioned, like, oh well maybe they bury their dead. It's like, yeah, that's clearly like we don't that's just like unconstrained speculation. Like but I mean, I do think
It's
it's kind of
possible. Yeah,
plausible that
yeah,
they would do that. Like given the testimony that we have of them, like the kind of behavior they engage in, like if any of that is credible, then like it would be weird if they didn't bury their dead, I guess. But that's kind of like dependent on taking some of the eyewitness testimony seriously, which
yeah.
you might be skeptical of. Anybody
And
might be skeptical of, but
I mean, yeah, any of the, I mean, not to harp on this point too much, but any of the sort of inferences or thoughts about their like cognition depend on knowing something about their evolutionary history, right? Like, are they as social as chimpanzees or like or Neanderthals? Like maybe they're not. Maybe they're isolated. Maybe they're like I don't know, certain other kinds of species that only like come together to like reproduce and they don't. I mean, generally primates are social, but not always, especially we don't just like with the fossil record, like when people like Grover Krantz, the initial like kind of Bigfoot advocate in the academic community, identified Bigfoot as like Gigantopithecus blackie. And it's like, well, okay, we have a few jaws of Gigantopithecus. We don't even know if it was bipedal. We don't know anything about its like
Mm.
social like and even if you take that sort of like possibility, it doesn't tell you anything about like what how do you expect them to behave without some sort of information about like what environment did they evolve in? Like did they evolve in Asia? Like were they Gigantopithecines that then migrated here? Well, you'd expect that would have certain kind of behavioral effects like in their evolution. Um,
Hmm.
or did they like evolve here? I mean, right, there are a lot of things that we don't know that you would need to know to make these kinds of inferences. But I take your point that yeah, like right, it goes both ways. We also can't negate those inferences without having that information. So, the sort of the lack of constraint to some extent goes both ways. I mean, I think we've made a pretty good uh like case on both sides here. So people just sort of wherever their intuitions lie. I think that it's not unreasonable to go either way
Yeah.
here. Um but yeah, we talked about the Patterson-Gimlin film. I think I should say one thing about just I asked you about this before we started recording. One thing to say, I mean, yeah, so you point out I made this Substack post about how right, like people invoke these kinds of things we've been talking about, these undercutters, like they're really elusive and like we wouldn't expect to see them. That's why there's no body, and that's why like we haven't found a plausible sample. You can't say that in one breath, but then in the other breath say, well, we have all these experiences because right, like, this is the main thing Bigfoot advocates do appeal to is like we have all of these eyewitness experiences and like there's so many of them that it's it's like
Hmm.
plausible that they're veridical. Um, which sorry, it's philosopher terminology. Just they real experiences, like actually seeing Bigfoot. Um, and you can't like have both those things, right? You can't say that like all of these eyewitness or even like a vast majority of these eyewitness experiences are plausible. And also Bigfoot's really good at avoiding people and doesn't want to be found or seen. Those don't go together. However, it doesn't right it doesn't follow from that that none of the experience like it could be that Bigfoot's good at avoiding people and occasionally messes up or like, occasionally is injured or something like I don't think there are any eyewitnesses testimony, but there's like the cripple foot tracks that Jeff Meldrum really likes of like a Bigfoot that like supposedly walked weird because it had like a problem
Hmm.
with one of its feet and he has like the cast of that foot. Um, I mean, right, you might expect that kind of thing. I mean, so at the end of the day, like, how much people want to give credence to like the eyewitness testimony. It depends on like how many of them are sort of like reasonable versus how many are just kind of like crackpot ones. And also like a lot of them are they're from like they're versions of them like every state. And it's not like
Hmm.
plausible that Bigfoot lives in every state. It's like probably in like
Right.
California, Washington, right? So like how do you the exact number of those, whether you think the number of non-crazy eyewitness reports is like significant is sort of up to like a person to judge. I'm not going to say anything about that. I one thing that always is sort of a thorn in my side of wanting like I want to believe in these kinds of things, but so I mentioned the example to you of like Loch Ness, and this is one that gets me, right? Because the Loch Ness monster was like originally like a hoax, like all of the original stuff. Um, but then for like a long time, I think probably close to like 100 years after there, maybe 50, I don't know the details. After the initial hoax, there were like hundreds of eyewitness sightings, and a lot of them
Hmm.
were like similarly like not people that were obviously perpetuating the hoax, doesn't seem like. Some of them were really like detailed and credible, and people might have even signed affidavits about some of them. I don't know. But in general, you had a lot of eyewitness sightings. It was the kind of the same thing. We're like, yeah, most of these are probably crap, but there's probably a subset that are like legitimate, and the rest are maybe following along with the hype. Um, the problem is now they've recently done like eDNA analysis in Loch Ness, and there are no reptiles, or at least no unknown reptiles there. There are European eels, which we didn't know, which is cool. Oftentimes, if you look for cryptids, you'll find something cool, but just not the cryptid you're looking for. This happened with the Yeti too, actually. There's a couple hair samples they thought were the Yeti that didn't turn out to be the Yeti, but there was like a species of polar bear that we thought was extinct for like 40,000 years. So it's cool. I think this way you just do cryptozoology because occasionally you'll find cool shit that you weren't expecting. But in general, right, like so that seems to be a problem with making these. What I'm getting at is it seems to be a problem with making these kinds of. There seems to be empirical reasons to be skeptical of this kind of inference from vast majority of eyewitnesses to the existence of some animal because you had all these eyewitnesses in Loch Ness, and now we know for sure, like that beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Loch Ness monster does not exist. Like there's no sort of way to make the case for it. It just does not exist. So what do you do about those experiences, right? Were all of those people perpetuating hoaxes? Were they all liars? Like, presumably not. We don't want to say that. We don't want to say that about the Bigfoot case either. But then what was going on? Well, I don't know. People were interpreting their experience a certain way, but they were wrong about it. So it seems like that kind of thing can happen, like systematically and with
Yeah,
consistency of report, right? Like reporting an animal with the same type of features. And they can still be wrong. So I mean it
right.
seems like that should definitely make us uh less eager to infer like the existence of something like a cryptid off of just simply eyewitness reports. Um, but I don't
Yeah.
know. What do you think about that? We can talk briefly, then go to Patterson-Gimlin. But
Well, according to noted researcher Grok, there were about 1,000 sightings of the Loch Ness monster, which is, I mean, because we know that was a hoax, and like you
yeah,
said, there's other evidence that also supports that. I mean, it's as I think it's pretty much as certain as you can be about this kind of thing that there's no lake monster, like it's not real.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, compare that to like the over 100,000, so Bigfoot sightings, which we do have to cull that number, but still, it's like it is. I mean, at least according to these numbers, it's like 100 times more. Um, but like with uh, I don't know. I mean, I think that like the causal history there is like notably different, but it's still a really good point though that like something that is a known hoax that we know is not real. You can still get 1,000 eyewitness reports of something that just was not there.
yeah,
So that that should be troubling to like the Bigfoot advocate. But there are a couple like specific stories because I keep just kind of like alluding to these stories. But like there's one that Jimmy Akin just covered on his podcast called like the Hanobia Bigfoot siege or
Hmm.
something like that. Um, and like there, like I mentioned the one on the Otherworld podcast called The Expedition. And like that's kind of what I have in mind. Like if you listen to the reports of like those eyewitnesses, I think that like just for the sake of argument, like take them seriously, then you do come to some interesting, you get some interesting information, I think, from those. And I
yeah,
mean, the especially with like the expedition case, it's like uh it's tough because I don't want to like launch into the whole story. It would like take too long, but I like I said, I find some of these stories credible. Like it would be like they have to, like I said, they have to be hoaxing, they have to be lying. There's like no other plausible skeptical explanation for what happened in like some of the eyewitness reports, but it is worth actually looking into like the specific reports and not just kind of saying like assuming what people
yeah,
like, yeah, I get the gist, people see Bigfoot or whatever. It's like you should look into some of the cases because um it's hard to skeptic. Like if it's just like a noise you hear or it's just like in the distance you think you see something, like that's not hard to write off. But there are other cases I think that are much harder to write off, and you have to say that it's a hoax. Like you have to say they're lying. But yeah, I'm happy to move on to the Patterson-Gimlin film if you are.
cool. Yeah, sounds good. I feel like I had something to say about that, but I don't remember what it was. It's probably not that important. So yeah, yeah, I'm talking about the Patterson-Gimlin stuff. But I mean, yeah, I guess I should say I agree. Like, yeah, it doesn't, I think what I was trying to give was sort of like a general principle of like reasoning about this sort of experience, but I don't think that warrants like never looking at any of the report. I mean, this kind of part of what I was saying at the beginning about like responsible versus irresponsible skepticism, right? Like irresponsible would just be like anytime anybody gives you a report, say like, well, I have this general reason for thinking that no matter what you think you saw, you're wrong. And that's just not a, I mean, like, okay, that's, even if you try not to be right, that's not helpful in any kind of way, but also like that's not a responsible way to like look at evidence.
That's what
So
makes me think they're using that heuristic I mentioned earlier. Because like
yeah,
when you're reasoning like that, like it's so obviously bad reasoning. It's like, what is actually going on with you psychologically? And like I said, I think it's just that heuristic. Like what would make people laugh at me? Like what has the most sciency vibes that I could believe? And like that's just what they go with. Not, they're not actually like living up to their own stated principles of like following the evidence or anything like that.
yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, real quick, I was gonna say one thing about just one general uh thing to say. Another, I'm kind of just a mouthpiece for Degling, I realize in this video, because I'm just his book is like the main thing I've like read and sort of metabolized about this. But
Well, we are
um,
sponsored by him. We get $1 every time we mention the book.
oh, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks, Dave. Um, yeah,
I have the
don't.
same deal with Michael Humer. So I've made about $40,000. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say he points this out in the book that hoaxers are also like just to talk about hoaxers real quick, which leads well into the Patterson-Gimlin film because that's often the skeptical thing to say about Patterson. But in general, like hoaxers are a lot more clever in at certain times than people like think they are. Like, because this has happened. I forget the details, but it's come up before, like with Jeff Meldrum, the guy who's like the footprint expert that has all these casts that he's like, oh, I'm a footprint expert and these are definitely real. He's been duped like multiple times. Like the people have like given him like fake tracks, and there's been multiple times where he's been like, this is a real Bigfoot track, and they're like, nope, I made it up. So in gen, like you don't want to be gullible, right? Like you should. And the favorite my favorite example of this that Daglin gives in the book is there was a series of tracks, Bigfoot tracks that were going uphill at like a super long stride. I forget where this was with the details. Like, if anybody wants citations for any of these things, like email me or whatever. I'll dig through the book and find it. So I'm not making it up. But there was like a mud bank or something that was like really steep, and like there were Bigfoot tracks going up it that were like really long strides. So it was like some of the Bigfoot researchers looked at it and they were like, "There's no way that anybody hoaxed this. Like, no one could like walk this long, this far." And then it turned out what had happened was it was a hoax by a teenager who had put Bigfoot like prints on backwards and ran down the
Oh,
bank
yeah, yeah.
the kind of way. So it was like people were like, there's no way anybody could have hoaxed this. And it's like, but someone did. I mean, so there, I mean, right,
Yeah.
that's a sort of like that's not a super hard thing to do, right? But just in general, like hoaxers can be clever. They're not always just like trying to make a quick buck and like doing something really dumb and obvious that you can catch out. Like this is how like Meldrum and Krantz kind of acted, is they were like, well, I'm an expert, so there's no way a hoaxer could be sophisticated enough to fool me. And it's like Dave told me this once. That was a good quote. He was like, the moment you become convinced that no one can fool you, you become the easiest person in the world to fool. Um, like and so I think that applies in some cases like Krantz and Meldrum, where it's like when you're like, well, this is no one could fool me. It's like, well, yes, people can. Like, that's you have to
Yeah.
be just as skeptics should be more epistemically humble about Bigfoot. Believers should be too. Like, don't don't discount the sort of cleverness and ingenuity of people like that are interested in like doing this kind of thing. I mean, yeah, I guess this hasn't been confirmed for Cripplefoot, but Dave had a cool paper in Skeptical Inquirer who talked about how like Meldrum thought like the Cripplefoot track you couldn't like replicate. And Degling was like, actually, you could. You actually take like an infant foot, let's turn this kind of way, and just size it up, and you could make a cast
Mm,
that like looks like gives you the exact impression that Cripplefoot does. That's not to confirm anybody actually hoaxed it that way, but it's possible. So that's the general thing. Don't ever think that it's impossible to fool you or that you can't be wrong, whether you're a skeptic, believer, either way. Um,
yeah. Yeah, some of the tracks are interesting though. Like I've heard some of the stuff about like dermal ridges and like the toes are in different positions. Like,
mhm.
they kind of
Yeah,
like
like the splayed.
curl and then they
Yeah.
spread. Yeah, they like change position like in the same way that you would walk. Like,
Yeah.
it matches like normal. It's not like someone just carves out a big piece of wood and just kind of plops through the mud with like a weight vest on or something. It's like, yeah, some of the it's not impossible to like, make very, very, very detailed, casts and everything. And like it would be hard. Like it's hard work. That's why I say I just don't get it. Like, why would you put all this time and
Yeah.
effort into like creating like, unique dermal ridges and, like making the toes move and like curling them in exactly the right way, like to mimic like balancing and all that. Yeah, but yeah, there are really sophisticated hoaxers out there.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, not to say it's not not conclusive that everything has been hoaxed or could be, but definitely more things can be hoaxed than some people give it credit for.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I wonder, you gotta wonder sometimes if it's just like, again, not to psychoanalyze, but you wonder if it's some people like the hoaxers like that are just get off on like fooling people. Like if you put together a really good like Bigfoot track that tricked Jeff Meldrum, you're just like, I got him. Maybe somebody's really motivated to do that. I don't know. But
I
yeah,
can get it if they heard him say no one can fool me, and then it's just like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, I can kind of see that. But yeah, it's funny that kid running down the hill backwards. That's pretty smart. I
That's
like
cool.
that.
Yeah, that's a fun example. Yeah, I mean, so speaking of hoaxer, I mean, I don't know if I think Patterson's a hoaxer or not, but that's what, skeptics always say.
Hmm.
But yeah, Patterson-Gimlin films. I mean, I guess anybody who's listened this far probably knows what the Patterson-Gimlin film is. But do you want to give the rundown just in case anybody doesn't?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the famous Bigfoot image I mean, I don't know how famous it is actually because I reference it all the time. I'm like, the thing where he's like walking and like looking sideways, and then, or I guess she, and they're just like, no, like I'm like that comes from a video, like it was filmed in Northern California, like not that far from where I am actually, but yeah, in 1967 there was so I think the story goes that they were looking for Bigfoot and they were like
Yeah.
looking for a while. It wasn't like they set out and then like within 2 seconds like started filming. I think they were looking for I don't know, some amount of time before they came across one. But yeah, they're like he was on horseback and he like took this like shaky video and it's been like stabilized, like you can watch a stabilized version of it. And the first thing to say is like to modern eyes, it looks fake. Like it looks like an ape costume. Like I've never really bought the video, but there's some things to say in its defense. Um, I mean, like first of all, like it partly looks fake because it influenced costume design. So like now they're like, like the
Yeah.
standard like ape costume like mimics that video. Okay, so like that's part of why it just like immediately looks fake to, people watching it now. Um, but I think like at that time, it was much harder to make elaborate costumes like that. Like this film, like this, like shaky horseback video, like it was taken the same year as Planet of the Apes came out. Like I think the original. Um, but if you watch Planet of the Apes, it does not look like the Patterson-Gimlin film. Like I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar Hollywood production, and the costumes suck. Like I mean, they're good for the time, but it's like it doesn't
Right.
look anything like the Patterson-Gimlin film. Like it looks way less realistic and way less convincing. And that was the best money could buy. So there
Yeah.
are people who claim to have been involved, in that hoax. Like there's a guy who claims to have walked around in the suit, and there's a guy who claims to have made the costume. And, it's kind of interesting that skeptics are like so eager to believe those people. Um, like, so the guy who claims to have made the costume, 30 years after the fact, by the way, there are no duplicate costumes that he's ever produced. There's no receipt. There's no corroborating documents of any kind. And when he tried, so people said, "Why don't you make it again? And then we can do a recreation." So they did
It
that. He
looks
made another
terrible.
costume. It
Yeah.
looks like shit. Like
Yeah.
they made a recreation. They got the guy who claims to have walked in the original suit to walk in the new suit, and it looks nothing like it. I mean, like it's really terrible. And then it was so bad, I think the costume maker didn't want the video even released, and he makes all these excuses for why he couldn't do it right. It's like, dude, it's been decades, and it's already been like many, many years since the attempted recreation. But like, there's no physical evidence at all that he made the original costume. It's just his say so. And I just think it's kind of ironic that like skeptics are like so eager to like take this guy at his word. It's like you have, you know, testimony from one guy who has produced no evidence and actually like really like failed at a recreation. And they're just like, yeah, I trust this guy implicitly, but I don't trust like any of the tens of thousands of people who have claimed to see Bigfoot. Like I count that as zero evidence. But there's the testimony of this one guy who has given me nothing but his word, and like I totally, totally believe this guy. Like they promote him like, and like he has all the same material motivations that Patterson had. Like he
Yeah.
also like yeah, he's tried to like cash in on this. And again, it all happened like 30 years after the fact. Like I don't believe him for 1 second. Like even if
Yeah.
it was a hoax, I don't think he was involved. Um so yeah, on the other hand, some like Bigfoot advocates really point to like they really like analyze the video and they see all this stuff that I'm not sure I see when I watch it. They're just like you can see the muscles rippling like when it walks. I'm like I don't know if I see rippling muscles or like it just like glare off of the fur or something.
Yeah.
Like it's just highly interpretive and like I don't really see all the thing. Like I don't know. It could go either way for me. Like it might be real, but I don't know. At the end of the day, it's like you put a gun to my head. I'm like, I don't think it's real, but it is kind of like harder to debunk, I think, than
Yeah.
skeptics give it credit for. Like it would be hard to make a costume that looked that good at that time, you know. And
I actually I
when
also
they
think
tried
it
to recreate it, they failed. And that was, that was decades after the fact. They tried to recreate it and they just utterly failed.
Yeah. I mean, further, I think it would be hard to recreate it. Look, something look like that now. Like if people have, again, people still like fairly recently, I think, have like tried, and it's difficult. I mean, right, obviously, like camera quality being higher makes it more difficult to kind of do some things, and um, yeah, at the end of the day, like I guess I don't buy it either, and there are some like background reasons to think that. There's this book. I've not read this book. I've just heard it's good. By Greg Long called The Making of Bigfoot. That's apparently about the Patterson-Gimlin film. And it's mainly just like a biography of Patterson from like people who knew him. And he was like a sort of notorious like con man and is like confirmed that he had like just recently like tried to pull off a couple Bigfoot hoaxes and like was actively trying to hoax, and he had like a sketchbook where like a week or so before the Patterson-Gimlin film was supposedly shot, he had like a drawing of like a Bigfoot, like a Sasquatch supposedly that looked exactly like Patty, the supposed, thing
Hmm.
so there are like a lot of background evidence like Patterson had a lot of like motivation to like pull off a hoax, or motivation at least in the sense that he clearly had like was inclined to try to that create Bigfoot hoaxes.
Yeah.
Um, and so like there are a lot of reasons to be skeptical of Patterson, like as a person, like as a reliable source, and so that's good reason for thinking. So that's what a lot of skeptics focus on. I think, again, to plug it, in Dagling's book, I think it's chapter 5. He's got like a 50-page like attempted sort of like response to the Patterson-Gimlin film, and he only very briefly discusses that possibility. He mostly just talks about like the film and like
Yeah.
how people have tried to reconstruct certain things about the gate or like the size, and it's very hard to do because we don't actually know like what we don't know what angle the video was shot at, and so without sort of having the sort of information about what angle the camera is pointed at, it's really hard to tell how far like the subject in the video actually is from certain other objects in the background and how like that should affect the stride. Um, and so I mean that's a good so there are uh, it's at least I think what Dagling's chapter points out is it's definitely not you cannot conclusively infer from the video that um like it's not a human. Like it doesn't like the video nothing no facts about the video itself rule out the possibility that it's a hoax, right? Like at one point I think Grover Krantz tried to say that like you can tell how big the subject is and it's outside of like the dimensions of like what's possible for like human like height and weight, which is not true for two reasons. Even if his estimations were right, people do get that big. And secondly, like because of what I said about the camera angle, you actually can't like conclusively tell how big the subject is. And similarly with the people had pointed out that the gate it was like moved too fast to be a human. And there are two things to say about that. For one, like the length of stride, Dagling points out in the book, humans actually can affect a stride like seen in the Patterson-Gimlin film if they do what's called the a compliant gait. So it's kind of like the Groucho Marx walk. It's like if you sort of like lean back on your haunches and sort of I don't know. I'm not going to stand up and mime it out, but like look up like this sort of compliant gait. There's a certain kind of where we don't walk this way actually because it's very biomechanically ineffective. But for short distances, it's like a lot more like powerful. You can take longer strides. If somebody walked like this, they could recreate. Like he has a funny story in the book, but he actually did this. Like when I think when he was at either Yale or Duke, he he like had a camera set up somewhere, like his grad students would be coming by, and he'd be like, "Can you like record that?" And he was just like trying to do like the Bigfoot walk to sort of recreate it. So you could, and he was having people like videoing people doing it to see. So you can recreate the stride at least in a way. There's another thing we're missing some information, and so Degling points out in the book the conclusion he takes, I think, is the right one, which is that skeptics can't conclusively say that it's fake. There's no way to say that. But believers can't conclusively say that it's real either. Like we're just never going to know for sure. That's the
Yeah.
basic idea. Because we're missing part of the information we're missing is what film it was shot on. So I think it's either 16 or 24 millimeter, either one of the films. And if it was shot on one of those, then the speed at which it moves is actually impossible for a human. Um,
Mm.
but if it was shot at like 16 or something, then it is possible for a person to walk that way. So, and we don't know that. Like the sort of record of the original tape like is either lost or we don't have that information. So we just don't know. Like it's possible that the video shows a thing moving faster than it's possible for humans to, but we're never going to be able to find that out because we don't know what film it was shot on. But assuming it was shot on the film compatible with that, everything about the gate is sort of possible for a human to do. I think you're right, though, but I think to pick up on something you said, I think if the Patterson-Gimlin film is a hoax, then it was carried out almost exclusively by Patterson, and maybe like obviously he was there, like in the video, like kind of off to the side while Gimlin was shooting the video. Um, so he wasn't the person in the costume, but like I don't think any of the people that have come forward as like the hoaxer are the people. Like there had to be some sort of deal. I think like Bob Gimlin, the guy who was with him when this happened, thought it was real because
Hmm.
he's talked about it and he said he like had a rifle aimed at it because he was like freaked out. Um, I forget if Gimlin or Patterson was filming. Maybe Patterson was filming. Gimlin had the rifle. I forget the details. But Gimlin's also like gone around to Bigfoot conferences a lot in like the intervening years. He might still be alive or he recently passed away. But I think like if he was in on it, he would have let something slip by now.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think if it was a hoax, it was like pretty exclusively Patterson, and I think we have good reason to think it was a hoax by Patterson. But yeah, the suit is really hard to recreate. I mean, Daegling gives some interesting ideas of like it might have been somebody in like long john pajamas because they're like very form fitting with like certain kinds of padding. Could have looked like muscle movement. Um, and there are some anatomical details of Patty that aren't like quite right of what you'd expect of a primate, but others that are, like with the brow ridge and certain kinds of things. Um, so like yeah, it's possible that it was a hoax, but it's really hard to say for sure. I mean, I think it is one of the most like interesting. Like I agree with you. If you put gun to my head, I'm going to say it's not real. I don't think it's real. There are a lot of things about it that look fake, and a lot of the surrounding circumstances make it seem like it was probably fake. But it's also pretty hard to recreate something that looks that good, even now. And I mean, for 1967, yeah, it's pretty interesting piece of it. I think it's the most like definitely the most interesting piece of evidence for Bigfoot outside of like the eyewitness stuff is like it's definitely more compelling than the footprints. Much harder to
Hmm.
fake, I think, in some cases. Um,
Yeah. I
so I mean,
mean, I
again,
think
this
that I don't credit the well, at least not at this time. I haven't read Greg Long's book, but doesn't he go really into like the Philip Morris stuff, like the costume designer? Like doesn't he just totally buy that story of the guy who claims to have made the costume?
uh, I've not read the book, so I think he might. I think the yeah, he maybe does. I don't remember. Um,
I read some summary of it, like, cause you mentioned it, and I just looked it up really quick, and I like dismissed it immediately because I maybe I'm thinking of a different book, but he I think he really runs with that story. Like he like Philip Morris and Bob Hieronymus, like he like just totally trusts them. And like
yeah,
that's kind of what I was referring to earlier, where it's like skeptics for some reason are like they're extremely credulous about these guys to like say that they committed the hoax, but like have produced no evidence that they committed it that you'd think they would have. And also just failed to recreate it when they were, finally pressed to do it. Um, and it's like, I don't know, I kind of, I'm like kind of questioning someone who's like so eager to believe those people and like trying to like make Patterson out to be like just like a straight up con man. It's totally possible that he was that, but like if it like I would want to research it a little more deeply and like look into the sources for that. And if Greg Long does just totally buy the Morris
yeah,
and Hieronymus story, then I'd it to me it like casts doubt on his credibility. Like it seems like he might be the type of skeptic who I just don't care what they say.
yeah,
It matters to me not at all. Like I mean, like I said, if you just totally believe the costume designer, like based on what? Like why do you believe him? Like why would you trust that guy? Um yeah, but if it's only coming from him, then that's one thing. But if it's like well documented that Patterson is like a con man and a hoaxer, then yeah, obviously that totally changes the circumstances.
yeah,
But um one thing someone pointed out was that the arms and legs are like totally proportional to the body. And I thought that was interesting, like with the arms in particular, because like I saw some skeptical video where they were like, well, you could just, grab some arm extensions. Like you hang on to like a handle and then there's like a wooden rod that goes out into the hands and then you have like longer arms. It's like, yeah, but your elbows are still going to bend where your elbows are. So you're just going to have
yeah,
these like ridiculously long forearms that are like, twice as long as they should be. You're going to have like these stupid like elbows and then like, you know, forearms that are twice as long. Like it would be totally disproportionate, but like the elbow bend is like where it should be in the
yeah,
Patterson-Gimlin film. So it's like, how do you make arm extension? I mean, maybe that's possible, but like, how do you make arm extensions that have the joints in the right place? Because if you just
yeah,
had the kind of arm extensions that was suggested by just this one skeptic who I was listening to, it would not look proportionate at all. So I thought that was kind of an interesting detail. Like, and like you said, hoaxers are clever. Like, I'm sure some ingenious costume designer could make it look like the elbows are like way farther down than they actually are on the person in the costume. But yeah, I just thought it was just like an interesting hiccup in like the dude in a
Yeah.
costume theory.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things to say, but I mean, for one, I don't remember. I'm trying to have like do a mental replay now of the Patterson-Gimlin film. From what I remember, like the arms like kind of swing more, like they don't bend a ton. So you can maybe see that working. I mean, in general, but I mean, I go back to the general thing I want to say about this, which is just that like we really don't know like how someone could have hoaxed it. We also don't really know how it could be real. I mean, in the sense that like as Dagling points out, like he looked at some like data on like dimensions of human like limbs to body and like height and that kind of thing, and it's not outside the realm of possibility that a person um is like that tall and has those proportions of like legs and arms to their body, right? So like it's not impossible that a person like in a suit would look like that or have those proportions because of A, the data on like how humans are proportioned, but also because again, because of the sort of angle, we don't really know actually how like the parts of its body lined up with each other. I mean, right, that's sort of a cop out maybe to say that about everything, but I think it's like yeah, it's interesting. I don't really know. I don't know how someone could pull that off.
That's so interesting though about the film type. I didn't know that detail. That like if it was
Yeah.
this type of film, then that's significant evidence it was real. If it's this other type of film, then a human could replicate that.
Yeah, it was really interesting too. I mean, that's why Degling says, like, look, at the end of the day, like, I've given you all these reasons for thinking like a person could replicate it, but we don't know and we never will. Which is not, which is like not super satisfying, but it's I mean, it's kind of just is the what we're stuck with. Yeah, I mean, so it's hard to say anything conclusively about. It's interesting to look back at like what the first like John Napier and some of the other anthropologists and anatomists they showed it to initially and how they're like a divergence of opinion. Like a lot of them were like this looks totally fake. There are all these anatomical details that are wrong. And then there were a handful of them that were like actually this looks quite good, And I don't know how like a person could look like this. I mean, yeah, as far as the Greg Long book though, I have not read it either, so I'm not gonna like recommend it sort of just outright. But I think from the summaries of it I've read, whether or not he takes on the sort of Hieronymus story and such, I think the more interesting part of the book is that he goes through a lot of like he went and interviewed a lot of people that knew Patterson. It's like he's kind of building up some biographical background of people like kind of alleging that he was like a massive like con man. Um, but again, like do with that what you will, right? If people just don't like the guy and someone comes and is like, "Oh, is Patterson a massive asshole?" They'd be like, "Yeah, he was. Let me tell you all about it." So I mean, right, read
Hmm.
it. You read into that only as much as you want to. It seems like given the overall like reports, even from people like Renee DeHinden, who are big Bigfoot believers, that they kind of took him to be a little bit of a con man. Um,
Mm.
but again, do with that what you will. Like maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. Um, yeah, it's fine. The Patterson-Gimlin film is a really tough one to like say anything conclusive about 'cause it's like yeah, it's really really weird piece of evidence. I mean, because you have these other like supposed specimens like the Minnesota Iceman and stuff that were just like total bullshit, like obvious
Hmm.
hoax or bullshit. And
Yeah.
there's one thing I guess to say about the Patterson-Gimlin film, even if you're a skeptic, is like you cannot say it's like obviously bullshit in a way that's easy to demonstrate. Like even Dagling, who like looked at it and had a film expert friend of his from Duke look at it. I mean, it takes up like 50 pages of his book, like analyzing it. It's clearly
Yeah.
not like an open and shut case. So it's really interesting. But it's funny. I show it to people like that aren't into Bigfoot at all. I'm like, look at this, and they're like, that looks stupid and fake. And I'm like, no, but it's
Yeah.
not actually. Like it is. So it's kind of interesting that the sort of like folk reaction to it is like this looks so cheesy. It's like, well,
Yeah.
I assume it's most people don't know it was shot in like 1967, like before like you could CGI things really well or AI generate them.
Hmm.
Because like yeah, now
Yeah, that's
they
the trouble now is like even if you did have a video, like AI is getting so good with making videos that like there's no way you'd be able to tell. Like
yeah
and you couldn't say, like you mentioned earlier, what Dagling said, like as soon as you become convinced that you can't be fooled, then you become
yeah
a very easy person to fool. But yeah, if you're like, I can always tell when a video is
yeah
AI generated, it's like, well, maybe I mean like maybe you notice some very obvious ones, but like there could be really good ones that slip by you, you know?
yeah. That's a principle I have to keep in mind when teaching now. If it's like, I would always be able to tell if this paper was written by AI. It's like I'm pretty sure there are some examples of me not catching that. So like yeah, it's you definitely are
Yeah,
never. It's
there are
never.
dumb examples where it's super obvious that it's like AI. Like I can
Yeah,
like sometimes I see things written by students and I'm just like, yeah, this is clearly AI. Like this is so obvious. But I'm sure if you put your mind to it, like you could use AI as a tool and then like try to make it sound more like you or so. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it could be some kind of hybrid thing like that, or yeah, you could just be good at
I mean,
using
yeah,
it
you could
and
just
then knock it
feed
out.
it a handful of papers of yours and say, imitate my style and write a paper on this
Right,
topic. I
right.
mean, it's not that hard to do. I mean, I shouldn't be saying this in case any of my like future students are listening to it, but I mean, at the end of the day,
Tips and tricks for fooling your
if people
professor.
want to cheat, they can. Like whatever. Like it's not going to help them in the long run. I don't care. I might.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's I don't know if we should say anything else about that. Other than like, yeah, I don't have any sort of knockdown like silver bullet. Here's why like the Patterson-Gimlin film cannot be. I just think like, yeah, balance of evidence. Probably not really a Bigfoot being shot on camera because they had people like flood the area in the days after and like go look for Bigfoot, and there was no other like uh
Mm.
never any like subsequent evidence other than like some footprints. And I mean, when somebody goes out saying like, okay, I'm gonna go look for Bigfoot, and then they come back with a video, it's like, all right, it's a little bit less credible than if they were just out like hiking and shot this thing. So I mean,
Yeah,
that's one
yeah,
thing
yeah.
to keep in mind too. Not that that's conclusive, but it's Patterson again, given the look. I need to look. I should look up the sketch he did to see how much. But like I've seen it before, and it does look like Patty. It's like this guy that had
Hmm.
this drawing of a sort of like Bigfoot suit, basically, in his sketchbook. Goes out to
Did the
look for
drawing
Bigfoot.
have big naturals?
I'm pretty sure it did. Like I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure it did. It looked like Patty. Like yeah, so it has big
Mm.
naturals. I don't know if I could I'll try to find it on my phone at some point. But yeah, right. There's no like silver bullet against it, but it's definitely like given the
Yeah,
surrounding circumstances, it's like,
that is one detail too that's like, okay, wait, you were Bigfoot hunting and then you found Bigfoot? Like that's crazy. Like that's like yeah, because at first I thought, oh, he's just hiking in the woods, like, he's a nature photographer or something. And it's like, no, he was looking for Bigfoot. And
yeah.
like he was looking for like a week or so. I don't know the exact timeline, but it wasn't like he walked into the woods for 20 minutes and found it. But it's like, man, if they're that exposed, like, yeah, you would expect to find something else or like, because
Yeah.
people are all over that area. Like the whole region is like Bigfoot territory now. Like if you drive through that area, there's like Bigfoot stores and like Bigfoot museum and like, there's all kinds of stuff around there. And it's like, man, there should be something like there's no way you just got that lucky when you were like you were seeking it out and you got really lucky in a way that no one else ever has in that region in like the decades since then. Like yeah, it does seem a little suspicious to me that he well, more than a little suspicious that he's like, I'm gonna look for Bigfoot, and then he comes back, he's like, I found Bigfoot. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
cool.
It was a similar thing. I forget. It might have been Ivan Marks but up until like recently, like Jeff Meldrum had a guy. I think it was Ivan Marks, although I feel like he was from the older generation. Basically, Jeff Meldrum had a guy or a couple guys out like that he's kind of paid to go like look for Bigfoot evidence for him, and every once in a while they'll come back with, like a new footprint cast, and it's like okay, or like some hair sample that would come
Hmm.
back inconclusive. And so it's like, yeah, if you're paying guys to go out and find you Bigfoot evidence, they're probably going to occasionally come back with some footprint casts or something. And
Hmm.
at Meldrum at this point was again convinced he couldn't be fooled. Every time Marks would bring him a footprint, he'd be like, "Yo, this is yeah, it's good." Marks was another one who like confirmed hoaxer of multiple footprints, and then he also found one of the like most popular. I forget if he found the Bosberg tracks or one of the other ones, but he's like credited with like this track of yeah, this like long, like 30-foot trackway of Bigfoot tracks. People are like, this is a really plausible one. It's like, well, we know this guy hoaxed Bigfoot tracks before. So I mean, like, yeah, sure, maybe, it's like with Patterson. It's like, is it impossible that a guy who had already tried to hoax Bigfoot actually found a Bigfoot? I mean, no, that's possible. It counts a little bit against it. Um,
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, there was this one guy who his name is Steve Cook, and he's responsible for like the Michigan Dogman being called the Michigan Dogman. Like 'cause he made like a song about it or something, and he
nice.
actually didn't know that this was like a thing that people had seen. Like he thought he was making up like a monster or something. And then a bunch of people called into his like radio station and they were like, I saw that thing that you're talking about in the song. And he also created a successful hoax video of the Michigan
Oh
Dogman,
wow,
and
yeah.
like a lot of people fell for it. And then he finally like came clean about it, and a lot of people didn't believe him that when he said that he hoaxed it. Like they still, I never, for the record, I never fell for the video. I never fall for these. It's impossible to fool me with
Right.
regard to these videos, but
Once you've
like
actually
I
seen the
never
Michigan Dog Man, it's harder to fool you. Yeah.
I'm like, that looks nothing like it. No, it was like I just didn't know, like I didn't know where it came from, and it like I don't know. I saw the video and I was just like, I just don't believe this. And then it turns out it was a hoax. And then he tried to do another hoax video, and people were like, "Man, shut up!" Like we, like it didn't work the second time. But there are still people who believe in the first video, even though
That's
the
crazy.
guy who like he admitted to it. And yeah, he's done this kind of thing before. But it's just interesting because you know it's not like Bigfoot because he actually gave a name to this thing, so he's kind of
Yeah.
like linked to this forever. And so a lot of people have come to him and told them like what they saw, and he is just like, yeah, I do believe some of these people. Like it's kind of hard
Yeah.
to avoid. Like that was also on the other. It was the same episode I was on Otherworld, but I didn't include it in the video on my channel. But if you go to the Otherworld podcast, then you can hear about his you know hoaxing activities, but also his some of the people who have come to him, and they have some pretty credible stories about the Michigan Dogman sightings.
Cool. Okay, well, that's most of what I think we have to say about Bigfoot. We could always do a part two if people are really interested in hearing us talk about Bigfoot or something. But just to turn to another issue real quick, and the topic of being spooky, just really quickly say something about ghosts. Um, so I don't have a ton of thoughts on like ghosts, other than since reading some stuff from Dale Allison, I find like experiential reports of them like more plausible than I once did. Um, I think there's interesting evidence, but I mean, there's also an interesting question I think of going back to this issue of like how do you evaluate evidence and this kind of thing? What do you do like when you take it that like your worldview rules out the possibility of something, and then there like are reports of it? So this kind of thing with like naturalists and miracles, right? Like suppose like what do you say about miracle reports if you're broadly speaking a naturalist? And I tend to be a naturalist and like a physicalist of some sort, I guess. Don't ask me why for now. Well, just but going on the assumption, right? Like say someone's a physicalist like me, I take it that that rules out believing in ghosts. I can't like, ghosts are supposed to be like souls or disembodied
Hmm.
minds or something. Of people like showing back up from like the afterlife. But I don't think there are any. I don't think there's an afterlife. I don't think there's like any sort of interdimensional plane. I think there's just like the physical world, and that's what people are, physical entities. So I take it that that means I can't believe in ghosts. There's an interesting question then, of, like, what do I do with the evidence of reports? And there's plenty to say about that. But uh, am I right to think that I can't believe in ghosts?
I think you can believe in a certain type of ghost. So I think I'm a more, yeah, I'm definitely more pro ghost than you. Um, I'm not a physicalist, but I'm not really settled on like, the dualist position. I just think it's plausible that there could be like a mental substance that could exist independently and a physical substance that could exist independently. Um, for me, it's either like there's just a mental substance. My second favorite view is that there's a mental substance and a physical substance. And my third favorite view is giving up, aka Mysterianism, and saying this is just above our pay grade. Um, but yeah, I think that dualism is more plausible than people typically think. So I
Yeah,
don't
that's
rule
probably
out.
right. Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting. Like if you come at this from like as a physicalist, like I remember being a physicalist and hearing ghost stories and being like that can't possibly be right. Because when I bonk you in the head, your cognition changes, which proves physicalism. And yeah, I do think that's actually wrong. So I mean, so I heard this story at first from Megan Fritz on Philosophy on the Fringes. So I'll divide these up into like different categories once I tell the story. But in 1953, there was this guy named Harry Martindale, and he was working in the cellar of this house in York. He was an 18-year-old apprentice at the time. Here I have the story pulled up. He went on to become a police officer for 30 years. So he was working on top of a ladder for a few hours, and he thought he heard the sound of like a trumpet, and he thought, oh, that must be coming from the street above. And then he looks down from his ladder, and there's like a Roman soldier with like a plumed helmet that just came out of the cellar wall. And then like 20 more soldiers marching in pairs came through. He like fell from his ladder and hid in a corner. And he said the soldiers looked tired, like they were returning from like a long expedition or something. And they were wearing green tunics and had round shields. And he could only see them from the knee up. Like they were walking normally, but like he could not see them like below their knee. Um, so he recounted the story like many, many times. Like the details always stayed the same. He just recently passed away. So at the time, historians were skeptical of his story because the traditional image of Roman soldiers was, red tunics and rectangular shields. And that did like his experience just did not align with what the like mainstream scholarship was of like how Romans looked in the military. So later, like it became like widely known that like they did sometimes have round shields and they did sometimes wear green tunics, but that was not known at the time. And
Mm.
also like this is like, a couple decades later, they excavated that area and they found out there was like an ancient Roman road going underneath that cellar. So they were walking like at street level for them, like they were walking, and then he was seeing them like in this house that was raised up a couple feet off the ground. So he was like, seeing them from the knee up, you know. So he did not know about green tunics, nobody did, and he didn't know about the round shields, and he didn't know about the ancient Roman road. Like no one knew that road was there. Um, so it's just kind of interesting that the skeptical explanations are like, well, maybe he misremembered some details about like Roman history or something. It's like, I don't know, the Roman military, wearing red is like a pretty distinctive image. Um, and like the rectangular shields and everything. Like, and then plus the road thing, it's like so he misremembered details or just like accidentally like there are three hits there, like where he got things right that like people didn't know at the time. And he was just accidentally right on three counts. Like that seems kind of unlikely. So when he first told the story, he was, laughed at, and he kept quiet about it until some academics interviewed him, like on TV or something in like the 70s. And according to his son, he never made any money off of it, partly because he was a police officer. And what else? He didn't believe in ghosts, or no, if someone asked him like, "Do you believe in ghosts?" He goes, "I don't know, but I believe in what I saw." So it's not like he was like a crusader for the paranormal or something. So, there's not really a material motivation. He didn't go around like telling his story like he did immediately, but then, he kept quiet about it for a while. And then there's just, there's the three hits, like there so he doesn't seem like a hoaxer. Like there's no material motivation, like he didn't make any money off of it. Like he was embarrassed about it at first. And then he got, details right about history that, he probably couldn't have known at the time, and about the road, which nobody knew about. Anyway, it's like, can you take that at face value if you're a physicalist? Okay, so this is why I mentioned there are like different types of ghosts, and this is like well recognized among people who take this stuff seriously. One of them is what you're describing, like a disembodied mind. You're looking at them and they are looking back at you, like you're interacting with like a disembodied spirit. And then the other kind of ghost is like it's sort of like a recording, or they're sometimes called hauntings. You're looking at them, they're not looking back at you. They're dead. This is like some type of memory or recording of something that happened before and it's just playing out. And that doesn't require, I mean, like I don't know if that's like consistent with physicalism, but I don't see why it couldn't be. The thing is it doesn't require dualism. Like you don't have to believe that those are disembodied minds. It's just like looking at like a VCR or like a video in a VCR playing back, or like thinking of something that happened and remembering it. It's not like those are disembodied minds that you're visualizing when you're having a memory. Um, and then the third type, which is not relevant here, is like if you believe in like telekinesis or something, like the thought goes like sometimes people are unintentionally like making things fall or slam or whatever, and they're like, oh, it's a ghost, when really it's just like people are unintentionally making things happen with their mind. So
Mm.
those are like three conceptual possibilities, and two of them don't really require dualism at all. Only one of them does. So in a way, and I know that you're a huge fan of panpsychism, but I think that like in a way, like thinking that
Notoriously, yeah.
notoriously huge advocate, and something about like the recording type, like the haunting type of ghost, like that does seem to fit like uniquely well with panpsychism, where if there is like only mental substance and mind is kind of everywhere, then you might expect that like certain functions that we associate strictly with like it's like this is a cognitive function, you need a brain to carry this out. You might expect something like memory to exist somewhere else other than in brains, but that's just kind of like an aside. But yeah, anyway, I don't think that that type of, and the thing is like this is really common. Like a lot of ghost stories are just like something that happened that plays out, and like people like try to talk to the ghost, it doesn't respond to them, it doesn't even
Yeah.
acknowledge them or seem to know that they're there. and it's just kind of like doing the same thing like over and over again. And I heard one skeptic joke like that's like the worst afterlife of all time is like you're just kind of like something happened and now you're just like standing on the balcony of like your castle or something, or you're just like sitting in a rocking chair on your porch, just like for eternity. But like, they don't believe that those are like actually disembodied minds. They think it's just some kind of like recording or memory of something that happened. I don't think that requires dualism at all. So, and the thing is, that is a huge portion of ghost stories. So, I think you could believe in that type of ghost, which is, the kind that seems to be involved in like Martinson's account.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's mainly it's like those added three details, like the green tunics, the round shields, and then the location of the road where the ghost. Because why would you add this detail? Like I could only see their knees, like they weren't.
Yeah.
And it turns out they're walking at ground level for this road that nobody knew existed at the time. Um, so yeah, I find that to be like one credible story. And it doesn't, like I said, I just keep repeating myself, but I don't think it requires dualism. So yeah, I'm interested to hear what you think about that case.
Cool. Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know the details of it. I don't have anything to say. I mean, like, I don't, and I probably should run soon, actually. So, we can maybe do a future
The
thing talking more
physicalist
about both.
running from debate yet again.
Yeah, yeah. I think
No,
right.
I
So, I
know you
mean,
have to go.
yeah, I think yeah, right. So the memory view is interesting, and I don't think it seems right. Like in principle, that kind of thing does not assume dualism. So I think that's cool. And so yeah, I'd have to think more about it. I think it doesn't make sense with some of the more plausible like reports of experiences with the ghosts. Like I mentioned, like so Dale Allison talks about this kind of thing being more common than we think because people are like hesitant to report it. But a lot of the
Hmm.
cases of people reporting experiences are more like no, they see a family member and they like hug them and touch them and talk to them. Um,
Yeah.
it seems like that kind of thing can't just be like the memory. But even if like the memory thing is right, then I have further questions that don't turn on like physicalism or dualism, but it's just like, okay, wait, how is like, memory is a psychological predicate we make of people. Like, how is memory located like in the world? I mean, like, right, maybe there's
Hmm.
the panpsychist story, but assuming you're not a panpsychist, like, whatever makes sense of this. So I think that
Assuming
like,
you're not one of the enlightened who
right,
accept assuming you're not one of the elite.
assuming
But
you're not
yeah,
one
I
of
mean, I
the
was just using
panpsychist
memory as
Bigfoot.
kind of
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I mean, I was using that as kind of an analogy. I don't know if it's like literally like the same.
yeah,
Like I was just saying, well, if memory is some kind of like natural process, then y- I mean, you don't really even have to be a panpsychist. It's just like maybe something like that natural process could occur elsewhere in nature other than just in brains. Like given the
yeah,
widespread testimony of stories like this. But yeah, you're right. Like a lot of the ghost stories, there's some kind of disembodied mind. Like there's no way around that. But I'm just saying there's like a big portion
right.
of ghost stories that don't really require that.
Yeah, cool. Okay, it was good to know. Good. So I can physicalist, we can believe in ghosts in some sense, and there's interesting things to say about it. I mean, presumably you could, even with the other accounts, it'd be fun to maybe do a follow-up at some point on ghosts. But we've been going for a while now, but this was really fun. Thanks for talking with me about Bigfoot. Um, Obviously, this has probably been on both our channels, so just, go watch each other's stuff and that kind of thing. But yeah, any closing words on your
I
end?
want to believe, I guess. I don't
Okay.
know. But yeah, no, it's
Me
been
too.
great talking to you.
In fairness.
I'm so glad we finally did it after talking about it forever. But yeah, um we should do it again sometime. Maybe not about Bigfoot, but about some other philosophy thing.
Absolutely. Happy to. But yeah, glad we finally did it as well. And thanks everyone for watching, assuming you have, and we'll see you next time.